Um, okay, then I think we are ready to begin. As I announced in the in our first lecture, we were dealing with work and organizational psychology during the whole term. And I announced in the first session that in the last session of this series, I would like to kind of wrap up all the different theories and the different topics and issues we have talked about, especially with regard to what our subject, our major of study here at our institute is, namely information systems, namely HCI. So why do we deal, or why did we deal for the last 3 months with this more work-related, more organization-related, somehow psychological, somehow sociological questions, if our main purpose is, or our main objective is, to design technology for workspaces, for people, for interaction. And what I try today is to give you some kind of a summary of how these different theories and how these different inputs from work and organization psychology could help us to design technology, and how could we use some of the methods, how could we integrate some of these inputs from psychology for this main objective to introduce technology into workspaces, workplaces. So the headline of this today's lecture is participatory design, and that's maybe more what I will talk about more in detail here in this lecture, is integrated organization technology development. So the structure is, this is made to end the party, so this is the last of this last session of this lecture, and it's going back to this promise in the beginning that I would like to close the circle in the end, and that is what I try to do today. So, and this is referring to concepts and approaches, theoretical approaches you maybe have heard about before, that are called socio-technical systems. This is quite an old approach, stemming from the 1960s, or maybe a more modern term, socially embedded systems. So what colleagues, some European colleagues, around 20 people, and myself, what we have done during the last 3 or 4 years, we have founded a European network for socially embedded systems. So where we try to integrate different research traditions, different research perspectives and strategies under this umbrella of systems that are socially embedded in practice, that are embedded in social context. I would then very briefly present you some approaches for modern software engineering and participatory design as the roots of what we will talk about a little later. And this is the development from these early approaches of participatory design to an integrated concept or an integrated approach that is trying to combine organizational development, what we have talked about in this lecture in the past, and technology development. So what we have is an approach that tries to integrate organizational questions, qualification matters, qualification issues, so personal development questions, and technological development, technological design. I will then give you some project examples and talk a little bit about these process models that are behind all these ideas. So these ideas of organization development, the ideas of action research, the ideas of modern technology development or software engineering or design methods. And if we find the time, I would like to talk a little bit in the end about some experiences we have made with this approach, with this integrated approach of organizational and technology development, and then maybe about some critique and some necessity to revise this approach stemming from the 1990s. Okay, coming back to these very early questions we have asked ourselves when we started with this lecture, in the context of our study, in the context of an Institute for Information Systems and for Technology Design. So why do we deal with work, or why do we deal with industrial and organizational psychology at all? What's the reason behind? Information systems and HCI, both are, in our understanding, both are design sciences. So we are designing technical artifacts, but for social and organizational practice. And that means that we are intervene into real life practices of users, of social systems, of groups, of social networks, of organizations, of companies, and so on. So if we change something in the technological infrastructure of an organization, we will impact the organization in different ways. And not only in a technological way. Yeah? It's very often, it's not only a technological matter, but there are a lot of social and cultural and process changes or interventions we do in these organizations. Maybe even unconscious. Maybe we even don't know about them, but we are doing it. So these are the consequences of our profession, of that what we are doing and striving for. So in my understanding, IS and HCI are applied to organizational, to social practice, to buyers, to clients, to customers, to contractors. All of them are organizations or part of organizations, and most often, but not always, in the domain of work. Yeah, so work psychology. But today we are dealing with a lot of different fields. So IT, as you know, or ICT, as you know, are intruding all the different parts of our life. Not only our working life, but our leisure time, our social life, or cultural life as well. And last but not least, in most cases, or in nearly all cases, we are members of social systems. We are members, participants of organizations ourselves. So we are, as software designers, or as information systems people, or Wirtschaftsinformatiker, usually we are employed by any kind of a company, or maybe we even are running an own startup company or something like that. We are belonging to social networks, we are belonging to social communities, and so on. So we all of us, are parts of organizations. So I think there's some good reasons to deal with these questions. How organizations are working, what kind of dynamics, social dynamics, cultural dynamics are influencing the life of an organization and influencing the performance of an organization. So the question I've written here, you see with these red letters, is how can we design for social systems or for organizations if we don't know about that? And my answer to this question would be, we cannot design appropriately. We cannot design really good or really well if we don't know about the processes, about the structures, about the developments, about the dynamics in organizations or in social systems. So at least we have to deal a little bit, at least we have to know a little bit, at least we have to analyze a little bit about the social systems, about the organizations, about the networks and communities we are designing for. Otherwise, we would design just for something we don't know, and this is not a very good idea. All right, so information systems, and information systems are, it's what I would call in German the direct translation, Informationssysteme. This is not only about technology, it's not only computer systems or ICT systems, but it's the application of ICT in social practice of human beings, of users. So information systems are socio-technical systems, always. They have always at least these two components of, there is some technological part, or some technological system, and this is applied, this is appropriated, and this is used in practice by users who are interacting with the system, but users are interacting with each other in a community, in a network, and so on, using our systems. They are using our ICT systems as media to support the interaction between human beings, between them. So we have always to do with systems that are characterized by human components, social components, and by technical components. And this requires social, organizational, personal, intellectual investments. There are a lot of issues engaged. It's not only about technology. So information systems are implemented not only technologically, but strategically as well. So who is deciding upon a specific kind of technology? Who draws the decision? Who is designing? Who is the designer? What is the role? What is the responsibility of maybe ourselves if we are designer and are designing something? And technology always needs for adaptation, appropriation, administration, and so on. So design for social practice is influencing the individual user, it's influencing groups, organizations, communities, networks, and it's maybe, if there are technological innovations, then they are influencing the society as a whole, as we know. So with regard to social software, we make this experience. With regard to mobile technologies or ubiquitous computing, we see that these new technology and these technological innovations are not only influencing or impacting single organizations, but the society as a whole. All right, so what is this term about these socially embedded systems? ICT artifacts are socially embedded, and they are always socially embedded if they are used by human users. If they are appropriated by human users, then all of them are socially and culturally embedded. There are mutually interdependencies between technical design and social and organizational development, as I said before. If I introduce or implement some new technology into some social system, I will change the social practice. And that means the social system, the organizational system, is developing in any kind of way. And there are two possibilities, of course. Either I have a very rigid technological system, and then the organizational processes, the social communication has to adapt to these new technical infrastructure. Or, on the other hand, the technological system, the technical infrastructure is kind of flexible so that the people could adapt it to their own needs and to their own requirements. And then you have a lot of situated aspects of context of technical design. So all what we have talked about before, like environmental questions. We have talked about laws. We have talked about ethical questions, about health and workload and stress. We have talked about organizational structures, organizational processes, hierarchy in organizations. We have talked about values and culture and climate in organizations. We have talked about how organizations are changing, how they are moving. And all these kinds of aspects and context conditions are constraints for our technological design, for our design task. So this all is kind of related to responsibility of designers. So we have to ask ourselves, is our job done if we have designed some part of technology? Is it done then? Or are there consequences? Are there impacts that we have to think about and that we maybe are even responsible for? Okay, now we start to kind of wrap up or repeat some content we have heard before, either here or in one of the other lectures you heard by colleagues of mine, for example. So the most modern software engineering approaches or software development approaches are cyclic models. So when we look into the history, look back into history, you will see that traditional approaches, traditional methods for software engineering were following kind of like linear process models or waterfall models. That means we have some starting point, we have some objectives, some goals. So you have a contract as a designer or a technical developer. You have a contract with some company or some organization. They are telling you what they need, and then you have a linear development from the start, from the beginning, from the requirements to the technical product in the end. So these were traditional images of how software development, how technological development is working. But today, modern approaches, nearly all of them are based on cyclic models, on cyclic processes. So what we have is kind of an analysis for the requirements, then we have some design phase, we have some realization where we implement a new kind of technology or some new features, some new functions, some new design of a technology. Then we have some prototypes. We are testing, we are evaluating these prototypes either in labs, in laboratories, or in the practice. And then we have an outcome of these testing or these evaluating phase. And according to these outcomes, we are redesigning our technology. So we have always these design, testing, redesign cycles. And what's very important is that in most of the modern technical development or software development practices, we will find the integration of users at any part of this process. So we need users for testing, for evaluation. We need them for the analysis for our technical requirements, design requirements, and so on. So far to technical development processes or modern understanding. What's important here is the most of them are relying on cyclic approaches. This is no longer linear development, but these are cyclic approaches with testing, redesign, and so on. Okay, if we are looking into the participatory design history, so meaning that users are integrated into the design processes, we will find the first ideas in the Tavistock, in the work of the Tavistock Institute. This institute was mentioned already in this lecture when dealing with the human relations approach. So the human relations approach was developed at the Tavistock Institute in London. And they were very famous with regard to democracy, programs, even political programs, quality of working life. In German, we had some programs that were called Humanisierung des Arbeitslebens, Humanisierung der Arbeit. Arbeit menschengerecht, menschenverträglich machen oder gestalten. And the Tavistock Institute was one of the founders of this action research idea, what we were talking about with regard to organization development. Action research is one of the main topics for organization development, main methods for organization development. And they were even propagating this social-technical systems approach, meaning that we are dealing with social systems, what I've told you before, social systems always in combinations, or technical systems always in combination in an integrated perspective, together in the interdependency with technical systems. So participatory design approaches, they started in the early 70s or maybe the late 60s even, and they very often were identified with or associated with the so-called Scandinavian approach of software development or software design. One of the very prominent scholars in this regard is Christiane Floyd, who was teaching informatics in Hamburg for a very long time. And we have to do with a very general problem, a very crucial main problem that we always face if we are developing technology for users. There's kind of a symmetry of ignorance. This was said by Gerhard Fischer, who is a professor in Denver for computer sciences, but originally here from Germany. He said there's a symmetry of ignorance between designers on the one hand and end users on the other hand. So they have completely different mental maps. So what designers have in mind, what users would need, is not necessarily what users really need. And what users are thinking about how to handle a technology, or how to deal with the technology, how to use it in practice, is not always and not necessarily what we as designers expect them to do. We are designing a piece of technology, we give it to users, and then we realize that the users are using, are adapting, are appropriating our very fine piece of technology in a completely different way than expected. They do stupid things with our prototypes or with our products. So this is because we don't know each other very good. So the most designers don't know the users, and the most users don't know. They don't know about the ideas that designers have. So what we need to do is we have to find a translation, an interpretation between a designer's view, a designer's mental map, and the user's view, the user's perspective, the user's mental map. This is the main idea, or the main driving force behind this approach of participatory design, because we have this symmetry of ignorance. We need users to integrate to get them integrated and invited in our design processes, so to learn from them and to directly benefit from their perspective, from their point of view. The definition for participatory design, and I know for the most, for many of you this will be some repetitions. Participatory design, end users, so here participants, are invited to cooperate with designers in the same process, and with researchers, of course, that are maybe counseling this process of design. Potentially, they are participating not only at the beginning, at the very beginning, so let's say in the requirements analysis, and then again in the end of the process, so when we test some products or when we evaluate some prototypes. But ideally, they would participate in many different phases of the process, so that in different stages of the development of a design, you always integrate the users, getting feedback, and revise your design ideas. So from the problem definition, for the development of solution ideas, solution concepts, then during the development, and then until the evaluation and testing. What do we do when we are doing participatory design? If we want to realize a participatory design project, what are we doing? And what you can see here with these methods, you see that the most of these methods are the same methods, or they are stemming originally from work and organizational psychology. So from this discipline we were talking about here in this lecture the whole time. So what we have is different. We have a participatory design workshops with different kind of methods, like creativity methods, like to get people engaged methods, like motivation mechanisms and so on. We are working with prototyping, with mock-ups, with throwaway prototypes. So that means, have you all of you an idea what mock-up means? Mock-ups, what that is? You are not designers. Are you familiar with that term of mock-up? A mock-up? A mock-up is kind of a very, very early prototype. So usually, if you would develop some kind of technology, a new piece of software or something, you would be sitting down and just writing code to develop some software tool or something. So, but in an even earlier stage, before you start to sit down and work on a computer and writing a program, you would maybe use some kind of a piece of paper and just a sketch on a piece of paper, and then discuss with some users and saying, look, I have some ideas in mind, and that could look in this and that way, and then you would discuss, and or you build something out of, you construct something, some maybe first designs of even hardware, like a new mobile phone. You would not directly build it out of these material with Gorilla Glass and so on, but you would maybe build it out of a paper or styropor or whatever before, and then just test it and play around and so on before you really start to make the first prototypes. So these are mock-ups, yeah? Or in another term, throwaway prototypes. So a piece of paper you could just throw away afterwards. It's not very expensive, it's not very resource hungry, it's just a first sketch of something. You are using these different creativity techniques to discuss with people, to get ideas, to collect ideas and so on. And then you use a lot of, let's say, social empirical methods, like ethnographic methods, like observation in an organizational environment. You sit there, you have these over-the-shoulder methods. Yeah, if you are, for example, if you are doing usability testing, then over-the-shoulder, these over-the-shoulder method would be a very prominent one. That you are just visit some workplaces where somebody, some user, is using some kind of technology to do his or her work, and you would sit beside or behind this person and would look over her shoulder, just watching what she's doing and trying to understand what she's doing. So these kind of observations or participant observations, so that you even try to do the job by yourself with some kind of software tool or technical tool, and then you will have first-hand experiences. Where are problems? Is it good? Is it not so good? Where are maybe opportunities to facilitate something. Then you would make a lot of talks. You would talk to the people. You would talk to users. You would make maybe in-depth interviews, so very, very deep interviews, to get a deep understanding of what really the people's needs are, the users' needs are. And we know from usability, user-centered design, user experience design, even end-user development, all these terms with these user, the term of user, in this definition. That means that we have to find opportunities, we have to find methods, and we have to find ways to integrate users, to invite users in our own processes, in our own profession of designing something, of developing a piece of technology or ICT or whatever. All right. So if we remember this lecture where we talked about organizational change, how are organizations changing over time? If there are new developments in the market, if there are new technological developments, if there are new product developments or new needs by customers, then how can an organization, how can it change? And we talked about that organizations have a real need to change. They can't be stable all the way over time without changing. So organizations have to find ways, systematic ways to change, to develop. And one of the most prominent approaches and theories dealing with this organizational change was the approach of organization development. And if you just remember maybe or think back to this lecture, you would see that when we are talking about organizational development, we are talking about a cyclic approach as well. Like we were talking about technology development, we are talking about cyclic approaches. And the same is true for organizational development. We are talking about cyclic approaches. This is not a linear process, it is a cyclic process. So there are phases of unfreezing a stable situation, to get the organization some flexibility, to get them moving. Then we have this process of moving, of changing. There is happening something. And then, after a while, we have a stage of refreezing a state again, so that the changed organization has the opportunity to execute the changes and new plans, new strategies, and so on in practice and try it out. But after some time, the conditions will change again, and you will restart this process of unfreezing, changing, and refreezing again. So it's a cyclic process from strategy development to process analysis and modeling of new alternatives. Then you have this adaptation of the organizational practices. Then you have kind of a evaluation phase of refreezing, and then again development of new strategies and so on. Okay, so again here we find in both domains of technology development and of organization development, we will find these cyclic approaches. At least in our modern understanding. Maybe not historically. If you look back historically, you will find different thoughts, but our modern understanding is that these are cycles. The same is true for action research. I told you before, organization development and action research, they are really near to each other. Yeah? It's very near approaches. And what we see for action research is, again, this is a cyclic approach. We have this is an approach for researching in different domains, in different fields of application, and to intervene into practice. So with these both words like action and research, we are just stating, we are just recognizing that researchers are not completely neutral persons, that do not move, that do not change anything in the practice. They are not very distanced, they are not just sitting in their labs and don't change the world. it's the other way around. If they are researching, they are intervening just by observing, just by making interviews, just by giving people strange ideas. So researchers are always, social researchers are always in some kind intervening into practice. So this is the main idea behind this action research. And so researchers are responsible for changes they are initiating in the practice. So again here we have a cyclic approach, an action research cycle, starting with the collection of data, then evaluation and planning of different opportunities, of different alternatives, then undertaking some action in the practice, doing something for research, doing something for intervention, and then you have kind of a critical reflection. What happened there? What did we learn? What are our findings? What are results? And then you maybe have to start the next cycle, beginning with data collection again. We have active researchers, and we have researchers that have kind of a follow and self-understanding of change managers. They are changing something. They are not neutral and distanced people just looking on something, but they are changing something. All right. What I try to hint here is that in very different kind of domains, so technology development, then organization development, and then here in research, research and development projects. We have different ideas. We have some similar thoughts, some similar experiences, some similar traditions, but we are stemming from different kind of histories. We are stemming from different disciplines, but we end up with kind of similar approaches, methodological approaches, with regard to these cyclic process models. We always end up in cycles. So to have a next level of or a next perspective of analysis, we have to deal with human beings. So we have dealt with technology, we have dealt with organizations, we have dealt with researchers here or people that are intervening into social practice, but we haven't dealt yet with human beings. How are human beings acting? What is what are the basis of the acting of human beings? And one, particularly here in Germany, an approach that was developed in Germany and that was very prominent during the last 40, 50 years, is the action regulation theory. These action regulation theory we have talked about very briefly before, are again, we find again, a cycle, a process cycle, a cyclic process model, like in all the other domains before. So here we have a cycle of performance, evaluation, and regulation. That means that people, human beings, if they want to get active, if they want to undertake a particular action, they have kind of some planning. They're planning to reach a goal or do something. Then they make something, they perform something, they do something. And then they evaluate, they really look whether they reached the goal already with what they have done, with what they have acted out, or whether they did not reach the goal. Then they have to regulate and maybe have to act again and again. And you can find these kind of regulation, action regulation cycle, you can find it on different micro or macro levels. So if you have an activity, that is the most general category, an activity like, for example, what should I say? Let's say taking part in a bicycle race. This would be your activity for the weekend. You are a participant in a competition, a bicycle race here through the hills or the mountains. But what do you have to do to take part in this activity? You have to operate. You have to do some kind of actions. So maybe you have to register for this race. Then you have to repair or prepare your bicycle. Then you have to prepare yourself. Then you have to go there where the start of this race is. Then you have to cycle, of course, very quick. Then you have to reach the goal of this race, and so on and so on and so on. So for one particular activity, you have a lot of actions to do. And with regard to some specific action, for example, just the action for registering for this race, you have to do special operations. You have to go to a place where you can register, or you have to enter a website in the World Wide Web. Then you have to fill in some information, your name, your address, your age, your weight, whatever. Then you have to send it, and so on and so on. Then you have to wait until you get a feedback email or something. So these are different operations just to fulfill one action. And what are these operations again? These operations are built on concrete movements. So to go to a special place where you could register, or to go into the internet, you have to walk to your computer, you have to sit down, you have to type in something on a keyboard, and so on. So you see, these are different general levels of, they are all part of one activity. And this theory, the action regulation theory, says that on each of these levels, on the level of sensomotoric phenomena, on the level of movements, on the level of operations, on the level of actions, and then most general on the level of activities, you always find these cyclic action regulation mechanism. On all these levels, you have this cyclic, I plan something, I want to reach some goal, then I do something, then I evaluate, did I reach my goal, yes or not? And then you have to regulate your movements, your operations, your actions, your activities. Okay? Was it clear? Or do you have questions of understanding with this regard? Because this is individual psychology. It's a little bit complicated if you look into the details. But I think most important here is what I would like you to remember, just to learn, is that on the level of individual activity, of individual actions, we have cyclic process models that are explaining why human beings, why people, and how people act in everyday life. They are following regulation cycles. Okay? So, and what you can see now, all right, so, okay. On the level of software engineering, I have said that before, but this is a very concrete example. This is stemming from this woman I have introduced before. Her name is Christiane Floyd. She was the first professor of computer science in Germany, and one of the first in Europe at all, as a female professor. She had developed this cyclic approach for participatory software engineering. This is called the STEPS model, the STEPS process model. You have this iterative process, or the cyclic process, with design and adaptation by users and redesign cycles. You have this integration of users, you have this participatory design approach, and you have this cyclic mechanism or this cyclic process model behind. All right, but now let's come to this first conclusion. What does that mean? What does it teach us? What do we learn? What we can learn is that with regard to these completely different disciplines, with different traditions and so on, we will find, in the end, quite similar process models of how the work, how the tasks are done in these different fields of action or research or development. So on the organization development level, on the action research level, on the human activity action regulation level, on the technology development or software engineering level, on all of these levels or in all of these different fields, you will find these different cyclic approaches I've talked about before. Okay, and why did I introduce all these different areas, these different domains, and these different cyclic process models? Of course, because I've got something in mind. And what I have in mind is an integration of these different domains, of these different fields. Excuse me. So what I've already mentioned is that when we are talking about socio-technical systems, we are talking about integration or interdependency between social things, organizational things, human beings play a role in this, and technology development or technical things on the other hand. So what do we need if we want to deal with complex technology projects for organizations or in social practices? What we need is kind of an integrated framework that helps us to understand how technical development and organizational development is working together. So, and what we did, and you will, up to today, I would say you could find the most of the content I told you within the last 3 months. You would find in other kinds of universities, if they are dealing with organization and work psychology, you would find them there again. Yeah? So this could be told by every teacher in I/O psychology all over the world. But this, what you hear today, is very specific. You would probably not hear it in an I/O lecture in any other university. Because the next approach, this integrated organization and technology approach, is something I was working on together with Volker Wolf during the early 1990s. So we developed this kind of approach, this kind of framework in 1992 and 1993 in practical R&D projects, so in research and development projects. We came to this problem awareness that dealing only with technology is not enough. At this time, we were dealing with a public administration. It was a German ministry. And this German ministry was trying to reorganize something. And they were trying, especially in this case, they were trying to introduce, on a very, very early stage, some services like emailing documents within the organization. And we were introducing some email tools, some email facility to them they haven't had before. And we thought about how do we have to design it, what would be the consequence in the organization, in this ministry, and so on. And then we introduced this system in one department of this ministry. And what we saw was kind of shocking. There were people losing their jobs. they didn't have jobs anymore. So, for example, they had kind of messengers running around carrying paper from messages from here to there. You didn't need these people anymore because you could send the message by yourself from one person to the next person. So in a public administration, they couldn't get rid of the people very easily. So they would not really lose their jobs, but they lost their task. So they had to find new tasks for them because they wouldn't be needed anymore. And so on. So it was quite obvious that we just were doing something. We were introducing some technology, and they were even Abstimmungsverhalten was changing, and so on. So we really saw there were organizational changes. There were even political. We were even influencing the political decision-making process just by introducing a new kind of communication technology. So we realized, okay, if you do some technology projects and introducing some email, I mean, this is very generic. Yeah, it's not very specific. You would not expect that they will result a lot of problems out of it, but they do. They do cause a lot of organizational problems. So we thought, okay, we have to deal with a highly complex situation, with a highly complex problem. And then what we came up with was this kind of framework. We developed this kind of framework. And in this framework, hidden in this framework, is this steps model for software engineering. There is this action regulation model of how human activity is working. There is this organization development cycle in it. And there is this action research cycle in it. And this is the reason why I just introduced the other models before, because they are embedded here in this model. What we are having here is a large cycle. The whole picture is a large cycle. But in this large cycle, you will find smaller cycles. And these smaller cycles are in these domains or in these development domains and levels of organization, technology, and personal qualification. So what we always need to do is, if you are doing a very complex project, you need to qualify users to participate in this project. You cannot just suppose, and you cannot just taking for granted that all the people are skilled to take part in some complicated projects or complex projects. So you have to build in a part for qualification as well. So, and in this integrated and organization technology development framework or idea, it's kind of an idea, a framework for orientation in complex technology introduction projects. You are starting with some kind of problem awareness. There's some problem in the organization. There is a problem with some practices or some structures and some processes, and how could we change it? What could we do? And then you would establish some project, just defining the goals, defining the objectives, and so on. Then you would have a stage of analysis. What is the state of the art? What are the actual practices in everyday life of the organization today? Then you have some creation of options, of different alternatives, on a technical level, on a personal level, and on an organizational level. How could we improve the processes? How could we improve the practices? How could we improve the technology infrastructure? And then you would planning real interventions on all of these levels. And then you would realize these interventions. You would implement something. And you would do it in an integrated way, right? So that organization development would be a kind of executed parallel to a technology development, parallel to some qualification measures. And so you come to a modified, here in our first understanding it was called a work system. Today I would say you come to a modified socio-technical system. You created something new. And then you evaluate this new socio-technical system in some practice. You just get it in practice, get it moving, get it in action, and then you evaluate it in the practice. And maybe you will come to a next problem awareness. Okay, now this was one step. You changed something, but they are coming up with these changes. There are coming up new problems. So what can you do? You maybe have to go and have a next cycle or a next step of development. So as I said, we introduced this kind of approach, this kind of framework in the early 1990s. And we tried to use this framework in different research projects. What you see here is some kind of methods that would be needed or that would be applied within such kind of an OTD project. So you had some workshops like for a kick-off of the whole project. You have some requirement analysis methods, needs assessment. You have task analysis and process analysis we have talked about before. We have heard here about task analysis in this lecture. You would not talk about task analysis in a usual computer science or informatics course. They would need about requirements analysis, sure, but maybe not about task analysis. So this is what I mean by integration. This is what I mean by combination. You need different information from different domains to come to an integrated solution. Then for qualification matters, you have some lectures, you have trainings for employees, for organization members and so on. You have a qualification concept, you have moderation trainings and trainings. With regard to the design options, design tasks, you have prototyping, you have workplace design, you have different methods for process engineering, re-engineering. For the evaluation of such a new system into the practice, you have transfer mechanisms, transfer methods, you have special kind of workshops. You have these methods for evaluation as well, like usability of technology or participant observation of new working practices and so on. So these are just examples of how different kind of methods stemming from social science, stemming from engineering science, stemming from other sciences, are just combined in such kind of a framework. Of course, this is an orientation framework for very complex projects, and in the everyday practice, you will not always deal with such complex projects. That means you will not always use this whole complete framework for every project. But we were trying to use this project in different use this framework in different projects. And I just would give you some very brief examples where we are trying to introduce this or to apply this framework for. What you can see here is not it's not readable. I know that, and you should not read the words that are in this cycle. It's just an example. In this OrgTech project, we were trying to find some technological support for a company working together with smaller construction companies. Yeah? So there was a larger company doing kind of Maschinenbau, and then you had construction companies that were contractors for this larger company helping them. And they needed some support for improving the document exchange between the external construction offices and the internal construction department in this larger company. So what we did was we first needed to understand how the real actual practices looked like, how they were working. Then we had to define some problems, requirements. Then we had to develop some technology. We had to introduce it and evaluate it. But parallel to this, we changed the cooperation structures and the processes, the communication processes in the larger company, but in these networks with the external construction offices as well. So we had to take that into consideration, and we had to do some qualification measures, some trainings, and so on. And that's what we did. And we did it in 2 cycles. We made one cycle of these three different processes in an integrated way. Then we learned something, we found out something, and we made a next cycle. Yeah? This just as an example how we tried to apply our model here for a concrete R&D project. To give you an idea, this is a project, and the next project, I think, the next one not, but this is a project with a duration over 3 years. So you could not do this kind of project, let's say, in 3 months or in half a year. It would not be enough time to do it. This was about 3 years. A project I have talked about before is a project where we aimed at networking, socially and technically, networking non-governmental organizations in Iran. It was kind of an international cooperation project, and we were contracted by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. They were funding this project, and there were a lot of NGOs in Iran. They were building schools, for example. They were building hospitals. They were dealing with women's rights. They were dealing with human rights and children's rights. There was some ecological movement dealing with environmental questions. There was some peace movement. And this project took part in the years from 2000, around 2000 to 2002. So it was before the Ahmadinejad regime came up in Iran. And what we were trying to do was to help these different NGOs in Iran to network together, to come together, and to build kind of a civil society community, and to coordinate their activities and their strategies and so on. And we were complete outsiders. We came from Germany. We were complete outsiders going into Iran. We didn't know about the situation there, nothing. But we brought with us some technology. We brought with us some competencies, some skills. So the people just called for us and asked us for help, so we tried. So what did we do? I mean, we had this framework in mind, but because here, again, we have a situation where we not just could throw some technology in. Yeah? We had to qualify people to use technology. We had to inform them about risks, yeah? Data security, privacy, and so on. We have to tell them a bit about political strategies, about strategies of political networking, and so on. All right. So what we said was we need kind of a framework again that is integrating, that is thinking together methods or measures for technology development, technology introduction, and the interwoven consequences with organization or network development, with qualificatory questions like, do the people have the competencies and skills? How could we improve them? And so on. So and what we did was, after a needs assessment, we did first planning workshops in different regions. And we did it in one region in Iran, in the capital, so in Tehran. And then, after we did one round of this analysis, development evaluation cycle. After we did it one time in Tehran, we exported the same methodology and the same idea in up to 4 additional provinces of Iran. So we did it in 4 different parts of Iran again and again. We were training users. We had some basic lectures for information. We had design workshops, participatory design workshops. We had some system design. And then we did it, as I said before, we did it in different regions in Iran again and again and again. All right. But then, additionally to that, when we came there the second time, we did our first cycle. This one. Then the second time, we did the same in 2 other regions. The third time, we did the same for 2 or 3 other regions as well. But when we came here, this second time, we went into Tehran, where we had the first the cycle before. We went there again and did additional measures. And these are the red ones. So we realized some advanced trainings. We did a train for trainer program, so just for educate trainers in the country so that they are independent after a while from ourselves as experts, so they build up their expertise by themselves. We made some project management trainings and development workshops again. We built up some working group that should coordinate the process after we disappeared. So again, help for self-help. We adapted the system that we had designed in the first place. And then we did the same in a third cycle again. Again, we had some advanced training for facilitators, for projects, trainers for the system, and for community building and so on. And we built up some rules, some code of ethics, and had again a readaptation of the system and so on. But yeah. It was, from our side, it was a team of 3 persons. And we made the whole project over, let's say, some 2 years. But we were just visiting Iran, I think, 5 times for around 2 weeks. So the real work there in the local conditions or in the regions in Iran was 5 times around 2 weeks, so around 10 or whatever weeks. And the rest of the work was done like by teleworking, just advising the people there to do something by themselves. And in Iran, the civil society had something that they called, in the different regions, they had something that they called facility centers. And you would find it in different countries, in other countries in the world as well. So these are centers having some scientists, having some technological people, having some educators or teachers, and they are trying to organize training programs and so on for civil society or for NGOs. They are partly financed or funded by the state, partly by churches, sometimes by kind of unions, trade unions or whatever. And so these facility centers worked as our cooperation partners. So these were our cooperation partners in Iran. So what we did directly, what we started directly was work together with them, have a team there, build up a team in Iran with maybe around, in the beginning, around 6 to 8 persons in these facility centers out of 2 or 3 facility centers. But then in the next step, they were just enlarging their infrastructure up to 15 or 20 or whatever persons or people. But we got funding, so the financial resources, speaking of financial resources, just for our own work, just for some traveling, and then not like here for full positions, but it was more like we were paid by activity. So the whole project was around, I don't know, maybe let it be 150,000 euro or something. So this was the financial frame for it. It was maybe not optimal, but it was we could do quite a lot of measures, and we had according to evaluation mechanisms and questions we asked the people and interviews and questionnaires and so. It was quite successful for a particular time, but then shortly after our third visit, our last visit was ending in Iran, we had this this first Gulf War, and then we had the elections when Ahmadinejad took over the government, and then the project was ended. So there was no opportunity anymore to do something in Iran. So, and I think, I'm not really sure, but I lost contact at that time. I lost contact to the most of these people that were involved on the Iranian side, and I think it was partly due to just an endangered situation. They could not just communicate very easy and very open to Europeans or to Western people anymore at a special time. I think today the situation would look a little bit better again, but at that time it was really hard and really difficult. So I think the most of the developments we were starting there were stopped at that time, and it was not. I think it was not really going on. All right. So after these, some projects I just very shortly described. We learned, of course, some lessons. We had some experiences with regard to this framework of a very advanced framework of organization and technology development. So if workplace is not the main focus, like in the last example, then we don't need to talk about work systems anymore. We have to change the expression, as I said before, into maybe a more general socio-technical systems. You are changing not only work systems, you are focusing not only on work systems, but on socio-technical systems in general. Then, if new emerging organizational structures are focused, so like networks or communities and not traditional companies, then the establishment of social structures itself needs to be considered. That wasn't done before, because before, when we just developed this approach, we were thinking about work systems, existing work systems in existing organizations. So there was an organization that was already existing, and then we were thinking about changing or developing this organization. But today we quite often have to do with just establishing structures. There is something that is just coming out of nothing. So like networks or communities, and we are maybe engaged in a very, very early stage. So we have to find new ideas and new approaches, not only on the development of some social systems, but on the establishment, the very early establishment of social systems at all. And then our main focus in this project was the redesign, again, not only existing organizations, but we always based on the redesign of existing technologies. So there were group systems already. We took some media already that have been there before, and then we adapted them, we redesigned them. Yeah, we tried to support this appropriation process. But this is a different thing than developing something just from the scratch, some complete new technology. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That depends on, and it's exactly the right question. The question is, how do I define redesign? And what we did was supporting the adaptation processes. What we could do was, you could just select some or pre-select some of the functionality of some software, and you could just block special parts of the functionality. For example, if they are dangerous for privacy reasons or something, you just block them out. You could redesign the GUI, and that's what we did. What we had to do here with all tools we used was we had to adapt the language. That means what we did was we were developing a Persian interfaces for all the systems, because they were only in other languages like English, of course, German and French and whatever, and maybe they were even in Arab, but not in Persian. And in Iran you speak Persian, not an Arabian language. And so you had to just to translate everything. We redesigned the GUI for some reasons, for some tools, and then it depends on the software systems. I mean, if the software systems have a high degree of flexibility, you could configure a lot of things. Then you have to find, in negotiation with the people there, with the users, with the end users. We did some end user development methods and some end user development things. So it's true, we were not completely redesigning the software and the core of many of these products completely and thoroughly, but we were just redesigning, adapting, configuring, throwing out, translating, just reshaping the things that were existing over there. So, and existing software infrastructures, and especially in the last example, existing constraints and on blockades and so on, constrain, of course, the introduction of groupware. So you could not do everything you could do in Germany with some software products in Iran. Yeah? Because the Iranians had just blocked landlines to international contacts and so on. So there was really hard constraints you had to deal with, political constraints, law constraints, and technological constraints. Other lessons learned is, as I said before, this framework, OTD, is a framework for quite complex projects, for maybe lasting over 3 years or more. If you have a smaller project, then maybe some parts of our large framework could be helpful for orientation. But you don't have always to run through the complete framework. Yeah? If you have just a smaller kind of project where you have just to readapt something, or you don't have to run through the whole process, but you maybe run only to a smaller cycle in the process, then unexpected organizational change need to be taken more explicitly into account. We didn't really build in our model reaction mechanisms for unexpected changes and unexpected use of technology and so on. We don't have any macro level factors like market requirements or society in our model, and obviously it would be better to have it inside, or to better integrate these macro level factors. And then the visualization, of course, is very quite old-fashioned. I mean, if you look at this, I mean, it's quite an old-fashioned figure, you know, and it's showing like the most of the other models I've showed before. These ones, you just always closed cycles, and the closed cycle doesn't show much development. Yeah, a closed cycle always looks like you're always doing the same sort of shit again and again and again and again, and you are not really developing at all, but you're always running in circles. That obviously this is not what it means. Yeah. So, but you don't have in the visualization, in this kind of a graphical figure, you don't have this dynamic of kind of a development. So what we probably would need to do if we make a revision of organization technology development, we have to do something like that. So to show, to visualize some main cycles, and then there are maybe some smaller cycles that are embedded in the main cycles, and there is kind of a spiral model or something like that that shows the development from one point to another point, or in levels or whatever. This is just one idea. We have to integrate socio-technical systems instead of work systems, as I said before. Our model is based on the idea that an organization have quite a complex bundle of main tasks or main objectives or main goals. And what we mainly did was we distinguished between a primary task, and the primary task for a shoe shop, for example, is selling shoes. Yeah. This is the main business, the core business. But then you have a secondary task, and this secondary task is to improve quality, to develop over time, to be successful, and so on. So the main task is your primary business, your core business. The secondary task is to create sustainability and to stay alive. And then we need, in these cyclic approaches, and this would be, I would just end with this thought, that for each cyclic approach you would need an exit option. Yeah, you don't need to run around ad infinitum again and again and again and again. You need some kind of an exit option just to make a really break in this development. Okay, there's kind of literature that is more general with regard to this model and to these processes I've just dealt with in this last lecture. And of course, there are some publications here from our group regarding this OTD model or this OTD thing, and you would find them all on our website. If you are interested a little bit more in this kind of ideas, then you could find the publications on our website. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. I would end this lecture here, giving you the opportunity, some minutes are left, for questions or comments or whatever you like.